Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's your boy HP, and you're listening to the Unsportsmanlike Conduct Podcast, a podcast for the average Joe covering football, my beloved New York Giants, some baseball and basketball from time to time, and any other current events impacting our sports world. Before I get started with today's agenda, everyone please follow me on Instagram. That's _unsportsmanlike_conduct. Again, that's _unsportsmanlike_conduct. I'm also on Twitter, so everyone please follow me on Twitter. That's _unsportsman. And lastly, but most importantly, if you're listening to this, you might as well subscribe. So everyone, please subscribe to my YouTube page. So the agenda for today, as Eli Manning approaches one of his last seasons as quarterback for the New York Giants, what better way to discuss whether Eli Manning is a Hall of Famer or not? Let's get this episode started. So a lot of folks, a lot of NFL analysts, a lot of ESPN panelists, and I think just a lot of football fans in general, whether they're New York Giants fans or just any other football team fan, are on the fence about whether Eli Manning should be a Hall of Famer or not. And I think the reason why a lot of people are on the fence is because one side of the fence, one side of the argument that Eli Manning is a Hall of Famer, is the fact that he's won 2 Super Bowls. And he's won 2 Super Bowls against very good New England Patriot teams. Remind you, one of the Super Bowl victories was against an undefeated New England Patriot team in which we had even lost to that actual regular season prior to the Super Bowl. And it was also just probably one of the more greater Super Bowls that I've ever witnessed, I think, over the last 10 years. And then the second Super Bowl also, again, came against the New England Patriots, and that team was on fire as well. And again, it ended up the game ended in a similar fashion where it was sort of a late score touchdown, late defensive stops. Both high dramatic, high octane games where everyone was engaged through all 4 quarters. And Eli Manning in both of those playoffs had a good run, had a good Super Bowl. And he also won 2 Super Bowl MVPs. So I think given that, people believe that Eli Manning is a Hall of Famer. And then on the other side of the fence, people don't believe Eli Manning is a Hall of Famer because for a Hall of Fame quarterback, some of the things that people look for are things like, whether that quarterback has made it to a ton of Pro Bowls, has that quarterback been voted as All-Pro multiple times, which Eli Manning, he doesn't fall into that category. Eli Manning hasn't made many Pro Bowls. He hasn't been voted as an All-Pro. He hasn't been MVP. MVP is another thing that people like to look to. Has this quarterback won any MVPs or even Offensive Player of the Year awards? But Eli Manning hasn't won either of those awards. And as a quarterback, to win an award like that, that's when you know you've dominated that year in your position. In the most important position in the NFL. And Eli Manning hasn't done that. He hasn't been even a candidate or consideration for MVP or Offensive Player of the Year. I think another thing that people like to look for is good statistics. Does Eli Manning overall have good statistics? Statistics that make you take a step back and say, wow, he transcended the game. He was one of the major quarterbacks that dominated his era. Eli Manning doesn't fall into that category either. And I think overall, I think one of these last points does Eli Manning have a good win-loss record? And, I don't know his win-loss record off the top of my head, but if you think about it, how many times has Eli Manning been in the playoffs in his 16-year career? Almost a handful. So with all that consideration, people don't believe that Eli Manning is a Hall of Fame quarterback. But may I remind you, it wasn't until Eli Manning won his second Super Bowl against the New England Patriots again, that was the talk of the whole offseason. Immediately after Eli Manning won the Super Bowl, everyone was asking, is Eli Manning a Hall of Fame quarterback? That was the debate that offseason and that summer. Because after that second Super Bowl, people really took a step back and said Eli Manning can get the job done. Because in those 2 Super Bowl victories, after he won his second chip, he won 2 Super Bowl MVPs. It wasn't like he was, like a quarterback like Trent Dilfer where he was just on for the ride, where his defense had to carry him. It wasn't like he was Peyton Manning when Peyton Manning won the Super Bowl with the Denver Broncos. Eli Manning had a fantastic Super Bowl run in both Super Bowl victories. He had a fantastic playoff run. I don't even think he threw a pick. And if he did, I think his touchdown to interception ratio was so off the charts. He had really good playoff runs and beat some very tough teams. In the first Super Bowl run, he beat a very good Dallas Cowboys team and a very good Green Bay Packers team. And in the second one, similarly to the same way, he beat a very good Atlanta Falcons team and a very good Green Bay Packer team. Eli Manning took down two generational Green Bay quarterbacks. He took down Brett Favre and then he took down Aaron Rodgers to win each of his Super Bowls. Those are the things that people remember. People have to forget about the Pro Bowls and the All-Pros and good stats because a quarterback relies on his team to help him get those good statistics. Eli Manning hasn't had a great offensive line since his last Super Bowl victory. He hasn't had a good complete set of offensive weapons since his last Super Bowl victory, and he hasn't had a good enough all-around defense that not only can get pressure to the quarterback, but can also have linebackers that can move sideline to sideline and have DBs that can cover. Ever since his last Super Bowl victory, Eli Manning has had a little bit of everything, but not together in a complete way, the way those teams are set up in those two Super Bowl victories. And so my argument is I think that Eli Manning is a Super Bowl quarterback. Excuse me, I think he is a Hall of Fame quarterback. And I think that relying on statistics, relying on awards, isn't necessarily the best way to go about it. Because you have to consider what took into place to allow Eli Manning to not have maybe the best win-loss record, to not have the greatest touchdown-interception ratio overall for his career, for being the reason why he hasn't had an MVP or an Offensive Player of the Year award. The reason why he doesn't get voted into Pro Bowls. But you want to talk about stats? It's not like Eli Manning's stats aren't great. But what ends up happening is Eli Manning gets compared to guys like Ben Roethlisberger and Phillip Rivers, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, the quarterbacks, the top-tier quarterbacks, even such as Drew Brees, and then with the new generation of quarterbacks like the Matt Ryans and Russell Wilsons, Eli Manning ends up getting compared to them. And so he ends up getting stacked up against them, and then what ends up happening is people do the comparison and say, Eli Manning is not putting up the same type of numbers as these guys are, and therefore the argument to consider him as a Hall of Famer is a tough one. But I think he'll be dancing into the Hall of Fame. And you want to talk about statistics? It's not like Eli Manning's stats aren't that bad. I think one of the more very biggest and glaring statistics is the fact that Eli Manning is top 10 in consecutive starts. He started 210 consecutive games. Folks, in order for a quarterback to start that many games, you have to be good. You have to be damn good. Because quarterback is one of the positions in the NFL that gets quickly replaced. If you can't prove to us, to any team, to any NFL coach or GM, that you can lead a team, get some victories, make the right throws, make the great throws, and drive down and win football games, you get replaced easily. And that's why there are so many teams that have consecutively drafted quarterbacks or have been up for consideration to drafting a quarterback every single NFL draft. That's exactly the same reason, because their quarterbacks have failed time and time again. With the New York Giants, it wasn't until this past NFL draft where people put pressure on Eli Manning and the New York Giants organization and said they have to draft a quarterback this year. I would even be a little more lenient and consider last year. Last year was probably the first year in Eli Manning's entire career, and so up until maybe 14 seasons, right, you'd think. After a decade and a half of playing in the NFL, the Giants had to consider drafting a quarterback. Think about how great you have to be at your position to hold it for a decade and a half. He had 210 consecutive starts, and then Ben McAdoo, who was a miserable, horrible head coach for the New York Giants, ended up benching him. And we all saw the outcome of that. We all saw the outcry from New York Giants fans. And the reason why people were so upset about that move, and that just goes to show you the inability of McAdoo to actually even organize and lead a team and coach up a team, is the fact that he ended up playing Geno Smith instead of Davis Webb, who was one of our young quarterback prospects. We started Geno Smith over Eli Manning, so that's the reason why Eli Manning today does not have a larger amount of consecutive starts. But he had 210 consecutive starts, and that is top 10. Again, you can't be a scrub. You can't be a bad quarterback and not have that many starts. For a quarterback, you have to be good to be able to play for over a decade. And it's not like Eli Manning is while season to season, You can't compare Eli Manning to any of the quarterbacks that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago. But you can put him up as if you put him up and you stack him up against an overall list, he stands pretty well. He ranks 7th in all-time passing yards, and he ranks 8th amongst all-time passing touchdowns. For a quarterback, that's pretty good. And I'll be honest, because I'm going to be fair here. His QBR, he's not even in the top 15 in QBR, and he's not even in the top 10, top 15 in completion percentage. And those two stats are also very important for a quarterback. But those two stats, he doesn't rank amongst the better quarterbacks of the NFL from current and past. But in the other two important stats, such as all-time passing yards and all-time passing touchdowns, I mean, that's a pretty impressive statistic. Because for the last, 6-7 years, he hasn't had a good offensive line. He hasn't had a good, complete, healthy set of receivers that he can rely on. He hasn't even had a good running game to rely on ever since the last Super Bowl win. It wasn't until last year, and I've mentioned this almost every single episode, it wasn't until last year where we finally saw a minor improvement in the offensive line, and we got Saquon Barkley, who's actually transcended this offense and has revitalized this running game that the Giants so badly needed over the last several years since Eli Manning's last Super Bowl victory. But you look at all the other top-tier quarterbacks like the Tom Brady's, Peyton Manning's, Ben Roethlisberger, Phillip Rivers, right? Because that's those are the people that you would maybe consider his peers currently at the moment. Maybe even guys like Aaron Rodgers. There's always been a comfortable set of players and a system around those quarterbacks for them to continuously succeed, be considered for MVP considerations, Offensive Player of the Years, and even Pro Bowls and All-Pro votes. But Eli Manning, Giants management has failed to do that for Eli Manning every single year. They have failed to do that. We saw that, right? They failed time and time again through the draft, time and time again through offseason acquisitions. That one year where we spent so much money on that defense by signing Olivier Vernon, Janoris Jenkins, and Snacks Harrison, why didn't we sign an offensive line? Why didn't we get some more wide receiver depth? We didn't do that because we didn't take care of Eli Manning. That was the year where we had so much money we could have taken care of Eli Manning. Instead of giving Olivier Vernon that big contract, because honestly, Snacks Harrison and Janoris Jenkins, there were already two players that were well-known players. Olivier Vernon was just coming off of a really good season with the Miami Dolphins. And actually, no, it wasn't even that great of a season. I think he came off an 8-sack season, and the Giants decided to pull the trigger and give him a shit ton of money. But it wasn't like Olivier Vernon was this legitimate pass-rushing threat. We could have maybe used that money on an offensive lineman. But we didn't do that. Every offseason we've seen until Dave Gettleman actually came in and said, okay, these are our weaknesses. I'm going to turn these weaknesses around. You know, this is the first time in a very long time where no one's worrying about the New York Giants offensive line or running game. The only concern at this point are the injuries to our wide receivers, given in the first couple of games, and the fact that Golden Tate will be suspended. So we're thin at wide receiver, but at any other position, if you look at what's going on in training camp, there's no other major concern. I'm just so sick and tired of these, just everyone saying that Eli Manning isn't good enough or hasn't proven enough times that he is good enough. Okay, I want to put this whole argument that he doesn't have enough good stats, I want to put that argument to rest. I want to put that shit to bed. Okay? And so what I ended up doing is I said, okay, he was drafted with Ben Roethlisberger and he was drafted with Phillip Rivers. So with there, I just wanted to do a comparison because I think everyone at this point believes Ben Roethlisberger is a Hall of Famer. I think with Phillip Rivers, it's a little bit up in the air. People are aren't too sure because Phillip Rivers hasn't had much playoff success. But with Phillip Rivers' stats, and I'm going to give a breakdown of it, all three of these guys have had very comparable stats. So if you're telling me that Eli Manning isn't a Hall of Famer, but Ben Roethlisberger is, and that Phillip Rivers you can maybe consider or have that debate of whether he is or not, then that just lets me know that everyone is an Eli Manning hater. Ben Roethlisberger at this point has thrown for 56,000 yards, 363 touchdowns, and 190 interceptions. Okay? Phillip Rivers has thrown for 54,000 yards, 374 touchdowns, and 178 interceptions. And then Eli Manning has thrown for 55,000 yards, 360 touchdowns, and 239 interceptions. So among the other two quarterbacks, Eli Manning has thrown almost as many yardage and as many touchdowns. The only main difference is the interceptions. But I mean, that's neither here or there, right? Interceptions are a part of the game. It's not like he's drastically thrown way more interceptions than every other quarterback. And if you want to have that interception argument to say, well, Philip Rivers has thrown 178 interceptions and Eli Manning has thrown 239, well, Philip Rivers hasn't won 2 Super Bowls. Philip Rivers hasn't had a continuous playoff success the way Ben Roethlisberger has. Philip Rivers wasn't even close to making it to a Super Bowl. There was a good window where everyone had the Chargers making a deep playoff run. In the early to mid-2000s, people had the Chargers making a deep playoff run, and they never did. And good quarterbacks can get their teams over the hump. Philip Rivers never did. And may I remind you, Eli Manning won 2 Super Bowls with a wild card team. So they never had the bye week when they won the Super Bowls. They won on the road. Every single game was played on the road. Eli Manning was a warrior and played lights out in both of those Super Bowl runs. And have we seen a more clutch quarterback than Eli Manning? I mean, that's the story. That's one of his best traits. Eli Manning is known for having high IQ. But Eli Manning is also known and has proven, you can see it on the field. You can even see it with those 2 Super Bowl runs, and almost every single year he finds a way. And granted, we haven't had many wins over the last several years, but the wins that we've had have been late drive runs. Eli Manning has shown time and time again that you can rely on him with the football with 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter. How many quarterbacks can you say have that capability of doing that? Eli Manning is one of the more clutch quarterbacks of our generation. I'm not saying he's the most. I'm not saying he's better than Tom Brady for most clutch. But he's up there, man. He has so many late drive-winning touchdowns, drive-winning games. A quarterback like that, how do you not consider a quarterback like that for the Hall of Fame? There have been receivers who've racked up statistics and solely just on statistics have made it to the Hall of Fame. But you're telling me a quarterback that has won 2 Super Bowls, has knocked down a very good New England Patriot team, doesn't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame? That clearly lets me know there is hatred for Eli Manning. Because Eli Manning did what a lot of people, a lot of teams couldn't do, which was take down the New England Patriots. Especially his first Super Bowl run where the New England Patriots were undefeated the whole season into the playoffs heading to the Super Bowl. No other team has done that. We've seen time and time again over the last couple of years, the New England Patriots and Tom Brady have been successful in winning the Super Bowl. With the exception against the Philadelphia Eagles, which was also a very close game. And a mistake also made by Bill Belichick where he didn't put in Malcolm Butler. Because all the pressure was on Stephon Gilmore at that point. Eli Manning is a Hall of Fame quarterback. You cannot tell me that he isn't. I don't see the argument. Just because he hasn't won that many accolades? You're telling me because Eli Manning hasn't been to many Pro Bowls that he isn't a Hall of Fame quarterback? But no one even cares about the Pro Bowl. People don't even watch the Pro Bowl game. So when the Pro Bowl comes around, you're not going to watch it and you're not going to care about it. And no one's going to even read about the articles. No one's going to read about the articles on how the Pro Bowl went. Because no one cares about it. But when it comes to discussing Eli Manning, Pro Bowl is one of the categories that people want to look for to see if he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Make up your mind, people. Is the Pro Bowl important or not? Because if you consider the Pro Bowl important, then I can see how you can use that as a factor to say, well, Eli Manning hasn't won many, or hasn't been to many Pro Bowls, so we're not too sure compared to the rest of the quarterbacks. But a Pro Bowl, and the crazy thing about the Pro Bowl, it isn't like the MLB All-Star Game where that All-Star Game decides who gets home field advantage. With football, the Pro Bowl is done at the end of the year. No one cares about it. Even at the All-Star game, at least there's a galore. There's some sort of there's some pride, whether the East or the West wins. I mean, I know at this point they've sort of switched the teams around, or they sort of switched the conferences around where there is no such thing as East or West anymore. But man, how could you tell me that because someone isn't an All-Pro or Pro Bowl, that's more important than Super Bowls? And I would understand if Eli Manning didn't play well or that the team had to carry Eli Manning, but Eli Manning in both runs in each game has made great clutch throws. Throws that every New York Giants fan and New England Patriots fan remembers. And I'm just sick and tired of having to defend Eli Manning every single year. And the reason why I have to defend Eli Manning every single year is because his stats don't jump off the chart year in and year out. So a lot of people think that Eli Manning's dead or he's done for. That he's fallen off. But no one wants to take the time to really dissect and get into Eli Manning's career. People just want to hop onto goddamn ESPN. You have some former NFL players that don't know anything, that don't follow the New York Giants, that don't follow Eli Manning, and then they just want to talk about the 2 Super Bowls and say, well, while he has won those 2 Super Bowls, he hasn't done anything for me lately, so therefore he can't be a Hall of Fame quarterback. Please. There have been quarterbacks who haven't even won a Super Bowl and are considered to be Hall of Fame because their stats are good. And again, it's not like Eli Manning didn't contribute to those Super Bowl victories. Without Eli Manning and having those great playoff runs and being so clutch in both Super Bowl victories, especially being clutch in the championship games to get to the Super Bowl, the Giants wouldn't be in the Super Bowl at all. Wouldn't have a chance to win it. You couldn't just throw any scrub on the New York Giants at that time. And I want to talk about the running game for a bit. Even though we had a good running game, we didn't have a great running game. We didn't have explosive runners that were going to sort of burn for 20, 30 rushing yards. We had a committee of running backs to sort of split the carries out. So Eli Manning was the reason why. And look, they were both low-scoring Super Bowls, but Eli Manning kept it together. He didn't make dumb mistakes. And I'm here to put that to bed. Eli Manning is a Hall of Famer. And I want to sort of go back to those 2 Super Bowl runs. Because in 2007, when Eli Manning won his first ring, in that playoff run, he went for 6 touchdowns, 1 interception. Okay? And then in 2011, when they beat the Patriots again, in that Super Bowl run, that playoff run, he threw 9 touchdowns and 1 interception. In both years, Eli Manning kept it together and played wonderful, tremendous, careful football. People are so wishy-washy with this whole argument about good statistics or awards. There are plenty of players that are in the Hall of Fame that also don't have glaring statistics. But because of a one-off sort of success, victories, or moments, they were able to make it to the Hall of Fame. You have guys like Joe Namath, who overall didn't have the greatest statistical career as a quarterback. And I'm not talking about the fact that maybe he didn't throw for as many touchdowns or as many yards. I'm talking about the simple fact that Joe Namath threw more interceptions than touchdowns. But because he had a good he had a good couple of playoff runs and won Super Bowl, he was elected to the Hall of Fame. Then you have guys like Warren Moon, who's had great stats, but never made it to the Super Bowl. So there have been quarterbacks that it's sort of hot and cold, where a quarterback can have good stats and not ever win a Super Bowl, and then a quarterback can not have as many great stats, win a Super Bowl, and still make it to the Hall of Fame. So all I'm asking is, which one is it? And then stick to that. Don't blame Eli, because Eli Manning has had a better career than Joe Namath. But Joe Namath is in the Hall of Fame. Eli Manning may not have overall from a sort of a better statistical career than Warren Moon, but Eli Manning has won Super Bowls. He's won 2 Super Bowls and has been an important part of those 2 Super Bowls. But Warren Moon's in the Hall of Fame. So which one is it? You can't sort of look at everything and then say because Eli Manning doesn't sort of check the box on most of the categories that you look for. And I previously mentioned those categories are Pro Bowls, All-Pro votes, MVPs, Offensive Player of the Year, win-loss records. And then let's I want to sort of get away from the quarterback position. There are running backs and wide receivers who have won nothing have accomplished nothing, and the only thing they have to their name are good statistics, some Pro Bowls, and all-pro votes. Because, and some of these wide receivers and running backs aren't even the reason why their teams won Super Bowls, if they did. And they've made it to the Hall of Fame. I think a good example of that is Chris Carter, a wide receiver who was on the Minnesota Vikings. Chris Carter was a good player. But do a lot of people immediately think Chris Carter Hall of Fame? Not necessarily. Another player that I believe is in the Hall of Fame is Curtis Martin, running back for the New York Jets. Curtis Martin, again, is one of those players that was a good running back. He was a good player. But do people immediately think he was a first ballot Hall of Famer? Do people sit back and think about Curtis Martin's career and say, yep, absolute Hall of Famer? I don't know if they do. And I'm not saying either of those players aren't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. What I'm trying to say is there's such a big inconsistency, but a lot of folks like to use sort of the downside of that inconsistency and apply it to Eli and say, well, Eli, you shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. And essentially, the reason why I wanted to start this podcast is for that same fact. There are so many naysayers against the New York Giants. There are so many naysayers against Eli Manning, and even when Beckham was on the New York Giants, so many people discredited Odell Beckham's talent. No one wanted to believe me. After the first year, I came out and I said this. I said, Odell Beckham is potentially a top 5 wide receiver. This was after his rookie year. Everyone thought I was crazy. No one thought I knew about football. People thought I was out of my damn mind. And now, he's considered to be a top 3 wide receiver behind Julio Jones and Antonio Brown. And obviously, there's a couple of other wide receivers you can sort of mix in there, right? You can throw in DeAndre Hopkins and Devontae Adams. You can throw in a Juju Smith now too, or a Mike Evans. And I get it, right? There's a lot of receivers. But for a good amount of time, Odell Beckham was considered to be a top 3 wide receiver. But there are so many naysayers and so many Odell Beckham haters. The whole world, I feel like, is sometimes against the New York Giants. And that's why I wanted to start this podcast, to give a more objective opinion about the New York Giants, because this is coming from a diehard New York Giants fan who's seen it all, who understands the circumstances, the consequences, and who understands what other New York Giants fans are going through. I'm on the blogs. I'm on Big Blue View. I don't really like to rely on ESPN a lot, but I'm on Big Blue View. I'm on these Instagram New York Giants fan pages. Even on the Facebook pages. I know what the community thinks of the New York Giants and how much we love our team. And I'll be damned if someone who hasn't followed the New York Giants career like I have, hasn't followed the New York Giants like I have over the last sort of decade or so, or has followed Eli Manning's career, is going to sort of put a negative connotation to the New York Giants or to Eli Manning and not have him be a Hall of Famer. And I just thought this was the perfect time to talk about it, because as we all know, Eli's probably almost on his last legs. This is probably his last year as a starter for the New York Giants at quarterback. And I thought, I need to sort of talk about this. I thought this was a very important topic for me to talk about. And again, I just want to conclude, I think Eli Manning is a Hall of Famer. His stats, from an all-time perspective, he's in some of those categories, in some of those important categories. In all-time in touchdowns, all-time passing yards. To be top 10 in all-time passing yards and touchdowns, you have to be good consistently. And it wasn't until a decade and a half later into his career that the New York Giants were considering getting a new quarterback to take over this franchise. Folks, that wraps it up. This was episode 17. Boy, was this episode fun to record. I do appreciate all the support, love, and the view. Please make sure you subscribe. It's your boy HP. This is Unsportsmanlike Conduct. Peace out.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.